Earlier, we live relatively comfortable and safe lives. The jets that flew over your head this morning did not sound an alarm in your mind. However, if you'd been parked in Kyiv or Kherson or Kharkiv, that would be a different thing entirely, because the hiss of those jet engines would normally be followed by enemy fire, perhaps into the very building you woke up in. So in war-torn countries like Ukraine, or perhaps you think about Iran and the unrest there and the 200 or so lives that have been reported lost as a result of this one woman being taken and killed in police custody, you can be thankful that you're in America today and not some other place. But concerns for personal safety don't just extend to other places and other parts of the world, because the truth about the matter is, even in the last couple of weeks, we've read some grisly things in the news. 5 people are gunned down on a Raleigh Greenway in broad daylight. 5 people just gone like that. And then just about a little over a week ago, a suspect in Stockton, California is apprehended, they believe, behind 7 random killings in that town. This is the reality of the world we live in. It's not as safe as we would like it to be. That's a grim picture. But we're wrong to suppose this morning that we have it worse off than the people when the Bible was penned. You know, David is the writer, without question, the writer of this psalm. He was a shepherd boy, but then he did grow up and he was a soldier in the army. And yet David didn't live with fear. He lived with faith, confident in the goodness of the shepherd who guided his every step. So I want you to notice how he sounds a note of confidence and security in the last words, the last verse of this psalm. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What confidence. Obviously, you can tell just by the words there, right, that David is at ease. He's totally relaxed. He's contented in the shepherd's care. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Now, how is it possible to live with this carefree attitude that we see demonstrated, even though we live in a corrupt and chaotic and even destructive world? I'd like you to consider your security today in 2 realms, both of which David is thinking about as he brings this psalm to a close. The first realm is this: my security in this life. You know, few of us like to be chased. I don't know about you, but I don't like to be chased. And chased, C-H-A-S-E. This is bothering me. Sorry. I'd like to see you. I don't like to see a microphone punching me in the face. Okay. Now I feel better. Do you? Okay, great. Nobody likes it when somebody gets right up on your bumper, and won't give you a break. And you feel even more unease when the thing behind you happens to have the cherries and berries blowing at, or whirling about behind you. Very unnerving to have that happen. We don't like people getting right up in our personal space, even in conversation here. 18 inches is pretty good. You get, a little bit closer than that and people get uncomfortable. At least I do. But there are times when I like to be chased. Like the time I left my credit card on the counter where I was doing a transaction and walked away, and someone said, "Oh, sir, here's your card. Thank you so much. You just saved me a great deal of headache," right? Or how about those keys that you innocently dropped out of your pocket on the way to the car, and now you can't figure out how to get into your automobile? You're glad when someone chases you down and hands those. Or how about the grocery sack you inadvertently left in the cart as you pushed it back to the return? You're going to the car and some good Samaritan says, "Hey, isn't this yours?" So sometimes it's good to be chased down, right? And this is what David is saying. He says, in my life, I want to tell you, it's been like I've been chased down everywhere I go. Somebody is chasing after me. And you know what they have in their hand? It's called goodness and mercy. It always is following me. What an awesome thing to say about his relationship with the Lord, that he was being hunted down through life with good things. Everywhere he went, he turned up goodness and mercy. Can you say that about your relationship with the Lord? Everywhere you turn, these things pop up. Let's consider that. So what about goodness? Followed by goodness. This speaks of the provisions of the Lord for our needs, and we've talked about them here in this psalm repeatedly. We've talked about, leading by still waters. We talked last week about he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup runs over. So God is providing for his needs. Have you lived long enough like David to know that God just has this reputation of always coming through when you need him to? You need something, and there it is in time, because your good God is supplying. This is what David is saying. The shepherd had met his every need all along the way. Wherever you happen to go, wherever you happen to turn, the goodness of the shepherd is there right behind you. In fact, one of the precious verse to me, Psalm 119, verse 68 about God's goodness. This about sums it up, right? Thou art good and doest good. Write that down. That's important. That'll always be true. God is telling you, I am good and I will always do good. He cannot do otherwise. Thou art good and doest good. This is the nature of the shepherd. But I imagine that there's probably one or more people in this room who doubt at times the goodness of the shepherd. And maybe some even doubting it this morning. Yeah, we have these sayings like, God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. I agree with that. We sing a song, almost chose it this morning, God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. We have those songs. We have those sayings. And yet we still wonder at times whether God is really being good to us. Like when we fall down the steps and break our wrist. And now we're in a splint on our dominant hand for the next 6 or 8 weeks and have to figure out how to eat with the other hand. Or you have another scenario like this. You invest your savings, you think you're being smart, you move it from one account, you put it into this another account, and then you watch what happened to the stock market this year, and 20% of your earnings just disappeared like that. Or you pray for help with a certain problem, and instead of the problem getting better, it gets worse. That ever happened to you? Like, what in the world? Is God really good? Now, why would David say this about the shepherd? Well, I think it's really significant that he would say this, especially if you know a little bit about David's background, right? Because David didn't have what we would call an easy life. He did grow up as a shepherd boy, had a godly father. He's the youngest of 8 boys in his family. He was the runt of the bunch, and he got the worst kind of work. But he did, through the slaying of Goliath, end up being in Saul's court. But that didn't last long, playing the harp, because Saul got upset at him and threw a javelin at David, not once, but 2 different times. And David comes within a hair of his life on those occasions. Then he's out in the Judean hills, fleeing from this mountain to another mountain, staying in this cave or that cave, and everywhere he goes, his life is really being threatened. I mean, it was like living in Ukraine. He's always being hunted down. Not by goodness and mercy, but by Saul and his army, everywhere he went. Twice he had the opportunity to take Saul out and end the little game, the cat and mouse game in the Judean hills, but he didn't do that. In fact, twice he reserves himself, once in a cave, and another time when he walked right into the midst of the camp, stood by the head of Abner, his captain, and Saul could have put a spear. In fact, Abishai wanted to do it. David, let me do it. I'll strike him once, and there won't be a need for a second time. I'll get it right. And David would not lift up his hand against the Lord's anointed, but instead lived with the fact that Saul would always be relentlessly at his heels trying to kill him. But the goodness of God, David says, was behind me all the time. and the goodness of God kept me from killing Saul and trumped the evil of Saul and eventually put me on Saul's throne. That's pretty amazing. A man who was troubled for his life for at least 13 years could still say, everywhere I went, it was like goodness was right there behind God's goodness. Followed also by that, David says, I was followed by mercy. Now, we define mercy quickly in a definition. We just say, God not giving me what I deserve. He's keeping me away from judgment. And that's true, but this particular word in the Hebrew is the equivalent for loyal, faithful love. It's the equivalent for the New Testament word agape love. This is the kind of love that you have between family or very close friends, that you would be willing to die for someone to protect them. It refuses to quit no matter what. So David is saying here, not just that God was showing him mercy, but that he was being hunted relentlessly by God's love. God was chasing him with love. Now, who wouldn't want a relationship like that? Someone who's always right behind you. Love you, man. Can't get away. I don't care what you say. I love you, man. And that's what David thinks about his relationship with the shepherd. He's just being hunted down by God's love. He's in the grip of divine love, and it would not let him go. That really is saying something, because aside from David's struggles with Saul and trying to stay alive in the wilderness, I mean, David wasn't, an angelic boy all the time. On one of those occasions, he fled from Saul and he went down to a town called Nob, N-O-B. And there he needs food, and he asked the high priest, Ahimelech there, can you give me some food? There's nothing there but the showbread, or what they had actually set on the Lord's table inside the tabernacle the day before, the showbread, the sacred bread. So he eats that. He says, do you have any weapons here? Because I'm in such haste, I didn't even bring my weapons. And Ahimelech gives him Goliath's sword. It was the only sword there. Was a result of that, one of Saul's men sees David being helped by the priests, and eventually Saul comes down and slays 85 priests because of David's miscue on that occasion. And he lied to Ahimelech and said he was on official king business when he wasn't. Then there's the other occasion that we're well familiar with in 2 Samuel chapter 11, where he commits sin with Bathsheba, the wife of another man, and then kills her husband to cover his sin. David wasn't always this virtuous little shepherd boy that we like to think about him when we read Psalm 23. But what we're finding out, right, is David is saying, it doesn't matter what happened in my life, God was just chasing me and loving me and caring for me. And he wouldn't quit even when I was ready at times to quit on him. And that's the kind of God you have. That is David's shepherd, but he is your shepherd too. And he is pursuing you with that kind of love. Surely, incidentally, I just passed over this word, but surely is a positive, emphatic word right at the beginning. This is true. This will hunt you all your life. If you're under this shepherd, he'll hunt you with good. And his mercy, or really his faithful, committed love. This good shepherd is faithful to love and will forgive. So what have you done? What have you done that is so awful that you think God cannot pursue you anymore with love? What do you think is so awful that's happened to you that God cannot pursue you with love? What have you done? David, I've just already given you David's plate. God pursued him with love. So despite your miscues, mistakes, and misdeeds, this same shepherd will forgive you. He will take you back no matter what. This is the kind of shepherd David has. This is our shepherd too. It's only because of the largeness of the shepherd's love that David could rest secure. And we need to get that right. The reason I can rest secure in my shepherd is not because I'm good and can maintain the performance that he likes. The reason I can rest in the security of my shepherd is because the largeness of his love. I cannot drive him away from myself. It will not happen. He's relentless. And this love was made possible only because the shepherd was willing to give his life for his sheep. Earlier in the service, I had Josh read today, John chapter 18. The good shepherd, John chapter 10, verse 11 says, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. This is how Jesus described his crucifixion. He was standing up for his sheep so that they could be freed. It took a love, really a love we can hardly fathom, for a God in heaven to care enough for us to give up himself so that we might be redeemed and rescued from our sin and given a place of status in God's kingdom. It took relentless love. So that's why David is saying, and that's why we can say, I've been followed by his love everywhere I go. Here's a quote. I don't normally do long quotes, but I'm going to do one. This is by J.I. Packer, writer of the book, classic now in Christian circles, Knowing God. I'm going to sum up just a piece of a chapter here. He knows me as a friend, one who loves me. There is no moment when his eye is off me or his attention distracted from me. No moment, therefore, when his care falters. This is momentous knowledge. This is unspeakable comfort in knowing that God is constantly taking knowledge of me in love and watching over me for my good. I think he summed up what David is trying to say to you, right? God loves you. He's being good to you. It's hard to fathom that. That's just monumental knowledge, but it's true about our good shepherd. So David says, I'm followed by goodness. I'm followed by mercy. And then he says next, I'm followed all my days. All my days, all the days of my life. There are no exclusions, no exceptions, no vacations. No matter what goodness, no matter what comes, goodness and mercy keep trailing along behind. Pause for a moment. Some of you are thinking of a not so good day in your past. And you're thinking that verse can't possibly be true all the days of my life, because I can remember some pretty bad days. The days when your world collapsed. A day when evil triumphed over good. A day when mercy went missing. Can you think of days like that? How can a verse like that be true? Because all my days aren't good. And I don't feel loved every single day of my life. But David here, his words, though they don't seem to square with reality, he's saying that not every day is filled with goodness and mercy and love and all of that. What he's saying is that even on those days, even on the bad days, if he just turned a little bit and looked over his shoulder, goodness and mercy was just right there, not too far behind. And they were going to come along in time. And haven't you experienced that? You've gone through some pretty hectic days. Some things you wouldn't have wanted to walk through. If you'd have known that had been in the plan, you would have argued with God to write that chapter out of your book. But they came anyway. And what David is saying, he has those stories too. And he's saying, when those days came, I've lived long enough to see goodness and mercy were still there. They were still on my heels. They were still hunting me down because my shepherd hadn't quit on me. And so even on the worst days, God was working for his good. And this knowledge has comforted Christians down to the present day. Many of you have this verse memorized. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. We know all things work together for good. Not for every person, but to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. You know what David is saying? When you have this shepherd, doesn't matter what happens to you in your life, you're set. You're set in this life, and then some, which leads me to my second point today, my security in the next life. And it's the second half of the verse, which reads this way, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I began today by talking about some insecurities that we all face in this life. Life is fragile. Many face death, we would say, before their time. While security in this life is important, it is certainly not enough. Because death is marching behind every one of us too. And here's the little rub, and here's why this part of the verse is so important. What then? What happens when death shows up? Will the sheep be severed from the shepherd at that moment when this life ends? That's really what this is this is what the verse is answering. Yes, so the shepherd goes through me, through life, and he takes me to green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness. He's with me when I'm in the valley of the shadow of death. He prepares a table. He does all those things. But what happens when I die? Will the shepherd be standing by? Will he be there for me? Well, David knew better. He understood that the end lands one in the presence of God. He says, I will dwell. He will dwell with God. The word dwell is an important word, for it signals one of God's chief purposes in humankind. Can we just talk about this? Just step away from the message and just talk about the word dwell for just a second. Dwell. All right? It just seems like a rather ordinary word. I dwell down the street at my house. Big deal, right? Well, in the garden, right, God placed two people, Adam and Eve, and God dwelt with them there. He walked in the garden with them in the coolness of the day. That happens in chapter 2, but the fall happens in Genesis chapter 3, and that fellowship is broken. You know what the plan of redemption and God's work in the world has been about since then? I got to get back with those people. I got to get back to them. And I'll tell you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this plan through Abraham's greater son, Jesus, and I'm going to send him down, and he's going to dwell with men on earth. And we're going to call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. That's one of his titles. Oh, God's tipping me off. He's showing me the playbook. He's telling me he's always wanted to dwell with me. And that's always been his purpose. And he was going to do it through Jesus Christ. And at the end of the age, when he consummates his love upon the people he has redeemed through Jesus Christ, this is what happens. Bring up the next verses. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 16. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. He's always wanted to dwell with you. Revelation 21, verse 3. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them in the end of the age. This is the eternal state. This is the end of our days. He's going to dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. So dwelling is the destiny of every believer, and this is what David knew about the shepherd. Centuries before Jesus was born, he knew God's plan was to dwell with his people. And David said, I'm going to dwell with God. I'm going to dwell with my shepherd. We're going to live in the same house. Not all people face death with that security. There are people in this room who don't have that security. I've talked to some of you about that. Death does march behind every one of us. But not everybody has the security of knowing that they'll be dwelling with God when this life ends. Let me do a little excursus here with Philip Keller. We've talked about Philip Keller before, the author of the book, A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23. And in the book, Keller mentions a time when it was his very first sheep ranch. And right next to his ranch, in which he had lush grass growing and healthy sheep, and he was doing all the things we've talked about in this psalm. He was really looking after his sheep because they were his cash crop, and he wasn't. Right next door, there's a fence between he and the neighbor was not a very good shepherd. The sheep were malnourished. They had the scabs and the disease that we've talked about, parasites on them. And he didn't rotate the pasture, so that the grass was always nibbled down to almost roots. There was nothing for them to eat. It was just miserable. But the way this pasture was, and I'm not sure if it was in South Africa, he didn't tell me which place. He did some shepherding in various places. One of those was British Columbia. But the fence row went right down to the sea between the two. And so there was water at the one end. At certain times of the year, the tide would get lower, according to Philip Keller, than normal. And there would be like this tidal flat right there. And with a few days of the sun, it would harden a little bit. And would you know it, those little sheep would sneak around the end from the bad shepherd, and they'd come on over, and he said it was actually dangerous for them because they'd start gorging, and their stomachs weren't used to it. They'd start gorging on the lush green grass. And if he didn't get to them quickly, they'd have stomach digestive issues. So he remembers one drizzly day, it's raining, he found 3 of the neighbors' ewes under a big fir tree. And so he scooped them up in his wheelbarrow and he wheeled them back to the other shepherd to turn them back over. And when he did, the other shepherd took out a killing knife and he slit every one of their throats because he could care less about the sheep. Sorry, that was a little heavy for Sunday morning. And it's then when Philip Keller remembered the words of John chapter 10 that are on the screen now. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. You know, his sheep got in the door of the good field and were well taken care of. But in the other pasture, it wasn't nearly as well because those sheep were under a different shepherd. And Jesus says then to us, I am the door, and unless you enter through me, you cannot enter the good pasture. So it is with every person in this room, every man, woman, boy, or girl, whatever your age, doesn't matter. You are not ever going to be fully content in this world. It's going to be like eating the roots in the bad farmer's field. And one day, as sick as you are, you will be turned over to the other shepherd who, showing no care, will slit your throat and open up the gate of hell and point you in that direction. And Satan will laugh as you fall headlong into hell because he couldn't care less. So what pasture are you feeding in today? Which shepherd owns you? The one who cares for his sheep or the one who could care less? Are you going to let them, Christian, my question, are you going to let them stay in the wrong pasture? Every day you see people on the other side of the fence. This is for Christians now. There is an application for non-believers. I've done that. This is for you, believer. You're on the other side of the fence. You're in the lush green valley. You're enjoying the good food and the care of the shepherd. Are you just going to let the other sheep die the way they are? Or are you going to tell them about the door? Jesus said, I am the door, and they can join you in the good shepherd's field. Dwelling with God. Always been God's purpose. And David said, I'm there. I'm all over that. But he also said, I'm going to dwell in his house forever. According to Keller, this fits with the pilgrimage of sheep that we've talked about through this course of messages. It starts with the shepherd in the springtime, taking his sheep out of the corrals, and he leads them up to the tableland mesas that we've talked about, into the high country where they can eat, where the snow is just melted and there's lush brooks from which they can drink. And then when the fall rains begin and the chilly weather sets in up on those table mesas, the shepherd's got to bring the sheep back down out of the hills and take them back to his house, to his corrals, and to his barn where they can winter. There they're going to be safe during the wintertime. And this is the picture. David understands the Lord doing the same thing for us. He's leading us through this life. He's taking us from one place to another, and He's feeding us in different valleys. But eventually He's going to say, come on home. I want you to winter with me right here in His house forever. This is what Jesus said in John chapter 14 and verse 2. In my Father's house are many mansions. This is the greatest comfort that any person in this room could know. Did you get that? Any person will be greatly comforted by knowing not that you're just secure in this life, but that you're safe in the Father's house forever. Are you certain that you're going to be in that house? That the shepherd will cause you to dwell in his own house. Finally, David says you're going to dwell there forever. That's how David ends it. His security has no limit. He says, length of days. It isn't technically a word for eternity, but if God's love is loyal and committed, as we talked about already, and won't let you go, if it lasts all of your days, the corresponding inference is there's never going to be any limit, no matter how old you get, no matter what happens to you. It's just going to go on for the length of my days. I will know that I'm in the house of the Lord forever, without fail, without quitting. Since God's commitment to His sheep has no end, our security has no end. We will dwell in His house forever. Last night they did a trunk or treat here on the campus. The school did. Hundreds of cars in the parking lot to get candy. I was a little jealous. I was thinking, I wish the cars would line up to get Christ. He is so much more valuable than candy. But kids love to have a good time, and they were here for a long time. There were kids everywhere, and they're all dressed up in costume, right, for this season of the year. And you ask even adults, right, if we're having a good time, we don't want it to end. Now, in maturity, well, some of us have maturity at our age, We've come to accept the good times have to come to an end. We have to close that chapter and move on to work or whatever the next thing is. But you know how it is with kids in good times, right? I mean, kids want to stay up as late as possible, right? They want to run the good time as far as it will go, no quitting, and just go, 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 and then they flop over dead, right? You've seen this as a parent or grandparent, right? Go, 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 boom. Where's so-and-so? She's on the couch, zonked out, right? Or if they're doing a play activity, away from home, one more time, Dad, just one more time. So they do it one more time. And then you go, one more time, just one more time. And so you let them do it one more time. And then, well, you know how the story goes. It would be all day until the sun sets at the water park before they'll let you go home. Wouldn't it be nice if you could be in a situation where the good times never did end? And you wake up the next morning and you're still at Disneyland or your favorite water park or whatever you like to do. And the day after that, and the day after that. I mean, and that really is the implication, not just of this scripture, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, but a scripture that we have on our banners this year that I've been trying to encourage you to memorize and know. Thou wilt show me the path of life. In thy presence is what? Fullness of joy. At thy right hand are pleasures forevermore. The good times don't have to end if this God is your shepherd. So what's the whole point about this? Do you have this shepherd? Are you feeding in his pasture? Is he your God? Then I want to say to you, you're set. You're set in this life and in the life which is to come. And nothing can separate you from that. Once you're in the shepherd's fold, you are safe and secure there forever. How many of you know what an annuity is? All right, about half of you. So a little education on an annuity. We're almost done. Don't miss the last comparison here, all right? Annuity. All right, so annuity takes a pool of money and invests it, out of which they pay and pay and pay over time. So my parents, their pictures are coming up on the screen now. As a result of my dad's accident back in 1983, most of you are familiar with that. I've spoken about it before. There was a lawsuit and eventually a settlement. And my parents didn't get a lump sum. They chose an annuity. And the annuity has paid them out every month for 34 years. The same amount, and it comes every month from the annuity. Over and over and over and over. In fact, as long as my dad stays alive, that money keeps coming over and over and over again. No matter how long he lives, or how old he gets, or even if his address changes, the annuity keeps paying. You follow me? Are you getting this? This is economics here. I didn't mean to get too complicated. Well, in a much greater way, what I'm trying to tell you is that you are connected to a great annuity that keeps paying over and over, no matter where you live or how old you get, the shepherd keeps paying. You're set for life and for the life to come. Now, Christian, aren't you glad this shepherd knows your name? Aren't you glad you're part of his fold forever? Let's pause to pray.